In news just in, President Cyril Ramaphosa has dismissed Nomgcobo, Jiba and Mrwebi as Deputy MPA Head and Special Director of Public Prosecutions. Jiba's attorney Nomgcobo confirmed to ENCA that Ramaphosa sent letters to the pair after former Constitutional Court Justice Nomgcobo found them unfit to hold office. Jiba and Mrwebi were suspended by Ramaphosa in October last year, pending the outcome of their inquiry into their fitness to hold office. They were found to have compromised the independence of the National Prosecuting Authority and acted contrary to the NPA Act, of course, legislation governing prosecutions in South Africa. We're due to speak to Glynis Breitenbach, former NBA prosecutor, as well as the current DA spokesperson on justice in a short while. But we're now joined by our reporter, Govan Whittles, who has been following that story for us. And the axe has now fallen on this pair at the NPA, Jiba and Mrwebi. And I suppose not a moment too soon, because the limitations of their suspension, the deadline, was yesterday.
It was indeed, and the presidency has also confirmed that the two letters were sent out last night, and the process from here on is that the decision by President Cyril Ramaphosa would now have to be sent to Parliament within 2 weeks, which would then be compelled to review the decision and decide to confirm it or to restore the pair to their office. But based on the outcomes of the Nomgcobo report, it now does seem final that the pair have been axed from the NPA. We're due to also get a response from Nomgcobo Jiba later this afternoon. They said that they will be releasing a press statement responding to that decision. But of course, we know that several organizations which also appeared as witnesses at the inquiry have welcomed the report and said it was inevitable that they would be kicked out of the NPA, and that has now happened.
Well, Govan, the legal wiggle room that Jiba and Mrwebi have been employing to not only stay in their positions but sort of justify their actions up until now looks to be being diminished severely, because these findings out of the Nomgcobo Commission were damning, to say the least. I mean, not respecting the independence and following due legal process. There was a raft of findings from former Constitutional Court Justice Nomgcobo that Cyril Ramaphosa could employ to get rid of them.
Yes, indeed. And the question really now is whether those findings are enough to institute further legal action against the pair, and what the implications would be of the Nomgcobo report on that General Counsel of the Bar Constitutional Court application for leave to appeal, them being allowed back onto the role of advocate. So two things have been established here: that they are unfit to hold office within the NPA, and that they acted contrary to the NPA Act, of course undermined the independence of the organizations, but also had no due respect for court processes. And as we have heard at the inquiry, the test for whether one is fit to be on the role of advocates is quite different to the test for whether one is fit to be in office at the NPA. And all eyes would now shift to the Constitutional Court and whether it would grant that leave to appeal to have them struck off the role of advocates. But as things stand, it seems as if their journey has finally come to an end within the NPA. That decision obviously being welcomed by the likes of Glynis Breitenbach already, but also organizations such as Freedom Under Law, the Council for the Advancement of South African Constitution, and the General Counsel of the Bar.
Govan, this is all the realm of speculation now, and we are awaiting this press statement by Nomgcobo, the legal counsel for Nomgcobo Jiba and Mrwebi. But what possibly could they employ now as an excuse as to why they should continue in their positions as Deputy Prosecutions Boss and Special Counsel? Surely the rope must be fully encircled around them now.
At face value, it does seem as if they don't have any more options left. But we do know that during the inquiry, they expressed some reservations to the structure of the inquiry, particularly Nomgcobo saying that he believes that the design of the entire process didn't afford him a proper opportunity to defend himself against specific allegations. But in the report, we see Justice Yvonne Nomgcobo saying that that didn't have much bearing on the outcome, as she found glaring gaps in his story, as well as the testimony of Nomgcobo Jiba, and found that there was actually no basis to declare them fit to hold office. So as things stand, we would be interested to see their response to the decision and whether it isn't only to accept what the president has to decide. As things stand, I doubt that they would have a leg to stand on to challenge this decision. But of course, even though President Cyril Ramaphosa has accepted the report's outcomes and recommendations, and he has fired the pair, that needs to be confirmed by Parliament within 2 weeks.
Govan, also heading further down the alley of speculation, the challenge against the way that this commission was structured. Say that does go ahead, and Zulema Javi does that on behalf of Jiba and Mrwebi. That could essentially be seen as a kicking for touch maneuver and trying to delay the process even further. But do we have any idea what shape that would take? I mean, if this is taken on judicial review, for instance, is there any sort of timeline that we could foresee this going down?
Well, that's simply too soon to say. As things stand, we know that the inquiry was promulgated in terms of the NPA Act, and the parameters of the inquiry, its terms of reference, were in line with that act. It was set up by President Cyril Ramaphosa after he suspended them in October last year. And at the inquiry, there was no challenge to the way that it was set up. There were only reservations to the way that the evidence was being introduced and the affidavits were being handled. It must be said that even though the evidence leaders formulated their report to Justice Yvonne Mrwebi based on the testimony that was heard and merely gave a summary of the testimony, both parties felt it necessary to issue additional notes to the evidence leaders' submission to Justice Yvonne Mrwebi, even though that was supposed to be completely balanced and not taking any side. So we have seen a constant communication between Justice Yvonne Mrwebi and the attorneys, legal representatives for Nomgcobo, Jiba and Mrwebi throughout this process. And of course, President Cyril Ramaphosa did consider the representations of Jiba and Mrwebi even after Justice Yvonne Mrwebi had submitted her report to him. So it does seem that they have had ample time to defend themselves, and they have failed to convince the president that they are fit to hold office. And the president has now decided that they should be fired from the NPA.
Well, it's fact that these findings have been made against Jiba and Mrwebi, regardless of whether or not this is the beginning of the end for them, or indeed perhaps the end of their tenure at the NPA, controversial to say the least. The allies that they had within the NPA, how will they, if at all, be affected by the outcomes of this report? Because surely there is an argument that the actions of Jiba and Mrwebi needed the support of people within the NPA itself.
Not only the NPA, but the criminal justice system at large. During the testimony at the Mrwebi inquiry, we heard a number of prosecutors and investigating officers saying that due to the decisions that were taken by both Mrwebi and Jiba, they found it difficult to follow up on cases such as the corruption investigation into former crime intelligence boss Richard Mdluli. And when we look at the Mrwebi report, one of the key findings from Justice Yvonne Mrwebi is that she believes that there should be further investigation into a flight where Nomgcobo Jiba allegedly traveled to Durban a day after her husband was pardoned. At the inquiry, she denied that this had ever happened, and the investigating officer said that there was some discrepancy in the spelling of a name and the details on the flight. Justice Yvonne Mrwebi saying that that could have a bearing on the investigation into former crime intelligence boss Richard Mdluli, and recommending that further investigations be done in that regard. But in terms of their allies within the NPA, this is something that the Council for the Advancement of South African Constitution has said requires more work from NPA head Shamila Batoy. And all eyes will really be on her after Parliament decides on President Cyril Ramaphosa's decision on whether or not she would take additional action within the NPA to follow up on some of the testimony that emerged at the inquiry.
Parliament needing to rubber stamp this. This is obviously going to be affected by the fact we have an election less than a fortnight away. What are the chances of this being rubber stamped before election day, or are we going to have to wait for the next Parliament to be formed?
Well, the actual time frames would make it just a day or two after the election, so we're in uncertain waters at this stage. It would be interesting to see how Parliament responds to their obligation to now consider the decision of President Cyril Ramaphosa. At this stage, we need clarity from the President as well as from the parties that are involved. And of course, we're yet to get the full release of the Nomgcobo report. What was leaked was the abridged version of 140 pages, but the full report is more than 300 pages. And some of these organizations that went to the inquiry saying that Jiba and Mrwebi should be fired are saying that they expect more damning allegations or findings to emerge once the full report is released to the public. President Ramaphosa did say that he would do so after his decision had been made, and that's what we're waiting for now.
Govan Whittles, thank you very much for tracking that story for us.